Before we start, I want to say that only 1% of you are subscribed. Please subscribe because when we reach 1,000 subscribers, I will post a special video for you. The buzz of activity on the intergalactic trade station hummed like a beehive in the void of space. Ships of all sizes docked and departed, carrying goods and beings from across the known universe. Amidst this chaos, David pushed through the crowded main concourse, his eyes scanning for the contact who would introduce him to this bustling hub of commerce and communication. David finally spotted him at a cafe nestled between a stall selling shimmering Martian textiles and a robotic kiosk dispensing what smelled unmistakably like Earth coffee. The man, an older human named Henrik, waved him over. "David, over here!" Henrik shouted above the din. His voice was gruff but welcoming. As David approached, Henrik's eyes twinkled with the kind of excitement that came from years of living on the edge of the unknown. "Welcome to the edge of civilization, or what passes for it out here," David chuckled, extending his hand. "Thanks, Henrik. It's quite the welcome party." They sat down at a small table, the station's cacophony somewhat muffled by the hum of the energy shield that enclosed the cafe. Henrik gestured to a server, ordering 2 cups of that Earth-like coffee. "So," Henrik started, stirring his drink, "the agency tells me you're here to study alien communication. This is the best place in the galaxy for that. You've got species from every corner speaking in every conceivable way." David nodded, pulling out a small notebook. "Exactly. I'm particularly interested in how trade negotiations happen when parties might not even perceive reality in the same way." Henrik laughed. "Oh, you'll see plenty of that. But let me introduce you to someone first." He stood up, waving to someone behind David. Turning around, David saw a tall figure approaching. The alien, Elira, had a graceful gait and a kind of luminous skin that seemed to subtly change colors with her movements. She had human-like features, but her eyes were larger, giving her a look of perpetual curiosity. "David, meet Elira," Henrik introduced. "Elira here is one of the few of her kind who ventures out to human spaces. She's a scholar herself, studying human behaviors." Elira extended a slender hand, which David shook gently. "It's a pleasure to meet you, David. I've read some about humans but haven't had much direct interaction." David smiled, intrigued. "The pleasure is all mine, Elira. Maybe we can teach each other a thing or two." "That's the spirit," Henrik exclaimed. "Now I've got to attend to some business, but you two get acquainted. Elira can show you the ropes around here." With Henrik gone, Elira gestured towards a pathway leading out of the cafe. "Shall we walk? I find motion conducive to conversation." As they strolled through the station, David observed the myriad interactions around them. Aliens bartered, negotiated, and socialized in a dizzying array of styles and languages. "So, Elira, how do you communicate most effectively with so many different species?" David asked, watching a heated exchange between a 4-armed merchant and a cloud-like being. Elira tilted her head, considering the question. "It's about empathy and patience. My people use a form of empathic resonance to feel the emotions of others, which helps bridge the gap between different perceptions." David scribbled in his notebook. "Fascinating. Humans rely a lot on verbal and nonverbal cues, but we often misinterpret them even among ourselves." They continued discussing their respective cultures and methods of communication, each fascinated by the other's explanations. The station seemed to shrink around them, the universe reduced to this shared orbit of curiosity and learning. As the station's artificial sun dipped below the horizon of the viewing ports, David felt the first spark of what he knew would be a significant chapter in his journey of understanding the universal language of connection. The promise of new knowledge and the thrill of unforeseen friendship marked the beginning of David's venture, far from the confines of Earth and into the sprawling, diverse expanse of galactic society. The Cultural Exchange Center on the station was bustling with activity as David walked in alongside Elira. The walls were adorned with digital displays, showcasing various languages and symbols from countless civilizations across the galaxy. David was particularly interested in a holographic panel that animated the linguistic structures morphing one into another. Alira pointed to the display. Each of those symbols represents a fundamental aspect of communication for a different species. It's fascinating how diverse our methods can be. David nodded, his eyes fixed on the shifting images. It's more than fascinating. It's essential knowledge. Understanding these can help prevent conflicts, foster trade, or even save lives in emergencies. As they wandered through the exhibits, they were joined by another human, Marco, a cultural anthropologist. Marco's quick smile was friendly and his gaze was sharp and assessing. Alira, David, I heard we had a new linguist on board. It's good to meet you, David. I've worked with Henrik before. He mentioned you might be joining us, Marco said, extending his hand. David shook it, pleased. Marco, yes. I've read some of your papers on interspecies social dynamics. I'm looking forward to collaborating. Marco chuckled. Well, you're in for a real treat here. This place is a melting pot of ideas and languages. Are you joining Alira for the Interspecies Communication Seminar today? Alira answered before David could. Yes, he is, and I believe it will be quite enlightening for all of us. The trio made their way to a seminar room filled with beings from various planets. The room buzzed with a cacophony of sounds that were part language, part other forms of communication like clicks, hums, and even bioluminescent flashes. As the seminar began, a renowned linguist from another galaxy introduced the topic of emotional expressions in language. The discussion focused on how emotions were conveyed differently by species. Some used words, others colors, and some even physical transformations. During a break, David and Marco engaged in a deep discussion. See, David, Marco said, pointing towards a group of insectoid creatures communicating through rapid wing vibrations. Their language is almost entirely based on wing movements. It's not just about the pattern, but the rhythm and speed, too. David was scribbling notes furiously. This is incredible. The potential for misinterpretation is enormous if you don't understand the nuances. Alira rejoined them, her eyes sparkling with interest. Would you like to try a simple exercise? It involves attempting to express a basic emotion in a way another species would. Both men agreed enthusiastically, and Alira guided them through a series of exercises designed to mimic non-human emotional expressions. They tried changing colors using light panels, creating patterns in sand, and even attempting simple musical notes that corresponded to specific feelings. Laughing at their clumsy attempts, Marco said, "It's harder than it looks, doesn't it? But imagine the possibilities if we can master even a few of these forms." As the seminar concluded, the group was buzzing with ideas and new understanding. David, Alira, and Marco lingered, discussing potential collaboration on a project that would utilize their combined expertise. This could be the beginning of something groundbreaking, David said, his voice filled with excitement. We could develop a new framework for interspecies communication, one that might someday be used all across the galaxy. Alira nodded. And it's just as important for fostering peaceful relations as it is for academic curiosity. Marco clapped both David and Alira on the shoulders. Then it's settled. We'll start working on a proposal for the station's academic council. With our insights and hard data, I think we'll make a compelling case. As they left the center, the stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter, the universe a tad less mysterious, as bridges began to form not just between stars, but hearts and minds as well. David invited Alira to his quarters for a more private discussion on human culture and emotions. His living space was modest but comfortable, decorated with artifacts and images from Earth, giving it a distinctly human touch. As Alira entered, her eyes were immediately drawn to a photograph of a vibrant sunset over the ocean. "Is this a common view on your planet?" she asked, her tone a mix of wonder and curiosity. "Yes, that's from a place called the Pacific Coast. It's known for its stunning sunsets, David explained, offering her a seat on a small couch. He then pulled up a series of images on a screen: landscapes, cityscapes, and various cultural events. Humans are very visually oriented. We connect a lot of our emotions to what we see. Elira nodded, absorbing the information. And is this how emotions are typically shared? Through images? Partly, David replied. But a lot of our emotional exchange happens through direct communication, talking, facial expressions, body language. Just then, Marco knocked and entered, carrying a small device that he handed to David. "I thought this might come in handy," he said, smiling. "It's an emotional translator. It might help bridge the gap in understanding here." David was intrigued. "Let's test it out. Elira, this device should give you a basic sense of human emotions based on what I say and my expressions." They spent the next hour talking, with David describing different human emotions: joy, sadness, anger, love, and the device translating these into concepts that Elira could understand. Marco observed and took notes, occasionally interjecting with questions or clarifications. During their conversation, David paused on the topic of love. Love can be complicated for humans. It's not just romantic. It's also the love we feel for friends, for family. Elira's expression was thoughtful. "In my culture, love is more communal. We don't have the same distinctions." "This is very interesting." Marco leaned in, interested. "Could you describe a situation that might evoke a strong emotional response in humans? Maybe a scenario involving these types of love?" David thought for a moment, then shared a story about a man who sacrificed his own safety to save his child during a natural disaster. As he detailed the father's fear, determination, and ultimate relief, he watched Elira's reaction through the lens of the emotional translator. Elira's response was a mix of awe and confusion. "I see the depth of this emotion," she said. "It's very powerful, very individual." Marco, always the anthropologist, asked, "How do you think understanding these emotions could affect interactions between our species?" "It could change everything," David said. "Empathy can bridge the vastest distances, even those between stars." As the evening drew to a close, Elira thanked them. "This has been incredibly enlightening. I feel closer to understanding humanity." Marco smiled, clapping David on the back. "And we're just getting started. Think of what else we can learn from each other." David nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. "Let's keep this dialogue open. It's going to be essential for both our cultures moving forward." Elira agreed, her voice earnest. "I look forward to our next discussion." As she left, David and Marco remained, talking late into the station's artificial night about the future of their project, excited about the potential to foster a deeper connection not only between themselves, but also between their entire species. The corridors of the intergalactic trade station were alive with the hum of commerce and conversation as David and Elira meandered through the bustling crowds. David had grown accustomed to the station's vibrancy, but today felt different. He was about to share a quintessential human experience with Elira, a date. "So what exactly constitutes a date in human terms?" Elira asked, her voice tinged with curiosity as they approached a quaint cafe known for its view of the nebula fields. David chuckled. "Well, it's usually two people spending time together to enjoy each other's company, often in a setting that's a bit more private or special. It's about sharing experiences." As they took their seats at a window-side table, Marco joined them, his presence a surprise to Elira. "Hope you don't mind me crashing your lesson in human customs," he grinned, ordering a drink from the holographic menu. "Not at all," Elira replied, her attention fixed on the stunning colors swirling in the cosmic winds outside. "It seems human customs are quite intricate." David and Marco exchanged a look, both amused and intrigued by her interest. "They can be," David agreed. "For example, on a date, it's common to share a meal, talk, and learn about each other's likes and dislikes. Alara nodded thoughtfully. And these interactions, they contribute to a deeper bond? Exactly, Marco chimed in. It's about building connections, understanding, and sometimes, if the chemistry is right, it might lead to a relationship. The conversation shifted to more casual topics: favorite foods, music, and tales of their respective home worlds. Elira was particularly fascinated by descriptions of Earth's oceans and mountains, while David and Marco enjoyed her tales of her planet's crystal forests. As their meals arrived, Elira continued to probe. Is there a significance to the types of food chosen on such occasions? David explained. Some foods might be considered more romantic, like chocolate or certain fruits. It's all about setting the mood and showing that you care through choice and preparation. Elira considered this, her fork hesitating over a slice of star fruit. I see. And does this setting, the viewing of the nebula, play a part as well? It does, Marco said, gesturing to the swirling colors outside. It's about creating a memorable atmosphere, something out of the ordinary that can heighten emotions and make the evening special. The meal passed with lively conversation, and as they left the cafe, David suggested a walk through the nearby Harmony Gardens, a dome filled with flora from across the galaxy. The air was fragrant with alien blossoms, and the path was lit by bioluminescent plants. This is beautiful, Elira murmured, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the glowing flowers. It's a popular spot for dates, David noted, watching her reaction to the scenery. Places like this are meant to inspire awe and make the moment feel significant. Elira stopped by a particularly radiant cluster of flowers, their petals opening as if to greet her. I understand more now. The human approach to bonding is very sensory. It engages all the senses in a way that's quite profound. Marco, who had been quietly observing, nodded. It's how we navigate much of our world. By engaging fully, we hope to connect deeply. As they made their way back to the station's main hub, the conversation became more reflective. Elira thanked them both for the insights. Today has been most illuminating. I feel I've gained a deeper appreciation not just for your customs, but for the care you take in forming personal bonds. David smiled, pleased with the outcome. And we've learned from you as well about the value of curiosity and openness. They parted with promises to explore more of each other's worlds, both metaphorically and literally. As David and Marco walked back to their quarters, they discussed the potential of further cultural exchanges, inspired by the connections they'd forged that evening. The station, a nexus of myriad lives and stories, seemed the perfect backdrop for such explorations, where every corner and every face offered a new lesson in the universal pursuit of understanding. David and Elira sat together in a secluded observation deck overlooking the stars, the vastness of space stretching out before them. The usual hum of the station seemed a world away, giving them a rare moment of quiet and privacy. I've been thinking about our discussions, Elira began, her voice low in the serene setting, about human emotions and relationships, and your custom of dating. David turned to her, noticing the contemplative look on her face. And what are your thoughts? It's all quite complex. The emotions, the rituals. It's much different from my people's way of forming bonds, Elira replied. David nodded. I can imagine. It must seem overly complicated at times, but for us, those complexities add depth to our connections. Elira smiled slightly. Yes, I see the beauty in that depth now, but there's still much I don't understand. For instance, you mentioned being inside as an expression of closeness in your last talk. What do you mean by saying that you'll be inside me? Her question was genuine, devoid of any discomfort, purely academic in nature. Caught slightly off guard, David took a moment to formulate his response. That's a very intimate aspect of human relationships, he explained carefully. It refers to a physical union, typically reserved for those who share a deep emotional bond. It's both a literal and figurative expression of being close. Elira considered his words, her gaze drifting back to the stars. Literal and figurative. I think I understand the concept, though it's very foreign to me. David chose his words with care. It's one of the most personal ways humans express love and trust, but it's always grounded in mutual respect and consent. The conversation paused as a ship passed in the distance, its lights flickering like a shooting star. Marco, who had been silent until now, joined them, sensing the weight of their discussion. "Talking about human intimacy, are we?" Marco asked, sitting beside them. "It's always a tricky topic when bridging cultures." "Yes," Elira responded. "David has been very enlightening. Your customs are rich with emotion and symbolism." Marco nodded. "It's fascinating how different species interpret intimacy. Some view it as purely functional, others as deeply spiritual." David added, "And for humans, it can be both. It often depends on the individuals involved. The physical aspect is just one part of a larger emotional landscape." Elira looked between the two men, her expression thoughtful. "I appreciate your openness in discussing this. It helps me see the nuances of human relationships." Marco smiled. "These conversations are valuable. They help us understand not only the differences, but also the commonalities in how we experience life and connection." The trio continued to talk as the station orbited silently around a nearby planet. The discussion moved from intimacy to other human experiences, joy, grief, and the pursuit of meaning in life. Each shared stories from their cultures, finding common ground and exploring differences. As the night progressed, the conversation deepened, strengthening the bond between them. They discussed potential collaborative projects that could help bridge the gap between human and alien understanding of emotional and physical intimacy. When it was time to part, Elira thanked them both. "This has been one of the most profound exchanges I've had since arriving here. I'm grateful for your insights and friendship." David and Marco both expressed their appreciation for her openness and curiosity. "It's conversations like these that make our work here so rewarding," David said. As Elira left, Marco turned to David. "Think we made some progress tonight?" "Definitely," David replied, looking out at the stars. "Understanding is the first step to acceptance. And who knows? Maybe our discussions here will one day lead to greater harmony between our species." Together, they watched the stars, contemplating the future, filled with hope and the promise of deeper connections, not just within the station, but across the galaxy. Back in David's quarters, the environment was set for a quiet, introspective evening. With soft lighting and a gentle hum of the station in the background, David and Elira prepared to explore the human concept of intimacy more deeply. David began, "Based on our last conversation, I thought it might be helpful to discuss, more practically, how humans express intimacy. Of course, only if you're comfortable with that." Elira nodded, her expression earnest. "I am. Understanding these aspects fully can only aid in my studies and our mutual understanding." David smiled, appreciative of her scientific approach. "All right. Generally, intimacy starts with something as simple as a conversation, like we're having now. It builds trust." Elira listened intently, her eyes fixed on David. "And after trust? It can progress to physical closeness," David explained, demonstrating by sitting slightly closer to Elira on the couch. "This is casual, but it sets the stage for more significant physical contact, like this." He reached out slowly and took her hand, giving her time to withdraw if she chose. When she didn't, he continued, "This is a common human gesture indicating comfort and affection." Elira's hand was cool and smooth, her touch light. "I see. And this touch communicates safety and affection?" "Exactly," David replied. "From here, if both parties are agreeable, they might share a hug or a kiss. It's a mutual decision, always." Marco entered quietly, carrying a small box of instruments. "Hope I'm not interrupting. I brought some sensory devices. They might help illustrate some points." "Not at all, Marco," Elira said, letting go of David's hand to look at the devices. "How do these work?" Marco set up a small device that emitted a soft, pulsing light. This tool helps visualize heart rate and warmth indicators of emotional and physical responses in humans. David used the opportunity to show how physical proximity could change these readings. "As I move closer, you'll notice the light changes. It's subtle, but it's part of how we interpret physical and emotional closeness." Elira observed the changes, fascinated. "It's quite sensitive. Do humans sense these changes as clearly?" "We do, but perhaps not as overtly as this device shows," David answered. "Much of it is subconscious." They moved through different demonstrations, with David carefully explaining each step, ensuring Elira's comfort. When they reached a discussion on kissing, David paused, looking to Elira for permission. "If you're curious, I can explain the mechanics of a kiss, but we don't have to demonstrate that." Elira considered, then nodded. "For science, a brief demonstration might be educational." David agreed, and very carefully he leaned in, giving Elira ample time to reconsider. Their kiss was a gentle peck, brief and chaste. "As you can see, it's a gentle touch of lips. It's seen as a sign of affection and connection," David explained afterward, watching the device's lights pulse slowly. "I understand better now," Elira said, her tone mixed with professional curiosity and personal reflection. "Your species has developed such intricate ways to express and confirm mutual affection." Marco, observing the interactions, added, "It's about sharing a moment, connecting in a way that words sometimes can't match." As the session concluded, Elira thanked them both for their openness and sensitivity. "This has been profoundly informative. I feel I've gained insights that would have been impossible through observation alone." David and Marco expressed their gratitude for her trust and willingness to understand. "It's all about mutual respect and learning," David said. "We're glad to have shared this with you." As Elira departed, the men discussed the evening, both feeling that they had contributed to something significant, not just to their research, but to a broader understanding between their cultures. In the quiet of the station, with the cosmos wheeling silently outside, the small steps they had taken felt like giant leaps towards bridging the human and alien divide. In the comfort of David's quarters, the atmosphere had settled into one of mutual curiosity and respect. With the initial discussions and demonstrations about human intimacy behind them, David and Elira now ventured into deeper, more personal territories of human connection and love. David began, "So last time we touched on the beginnings of intimacy and what that might look like. Are you comfortable going a bit further into the emotional aspects?" Elira nodded, her demeanor composed yet open. "Yes, I would like to understand more about the emotional continuity in human relationships. How do these initial actions evolve?" David thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "Well, after the initial stages, if both people feel a strong connection, they might decide to express their affection more openly. This can include more frequent touching, sharing more personal spaces, and more profound emotional exchanges." Marco, who had joined them again, added, "It's like building a house together, brick by brick. Each shared experience, each moment of understanding adds another layer." Elira looked between them. "And these layers, they contribute to a stable structure?" "Exactly," David replied. "And it's not always smooth. Like any structure, it can have its stresses and strains, but the strength comes from working through those together." The conversation shifted as David and Marco guided Elira through a simulation they had prepared. It was a virtual reality scenario depicting various stages of a human relationship, from the joyful highs to the challenging lows. As Elira experienced the simulated emotions, joy at shared success, sadness during a conflict, comfort in reconciliation, her understanding deepened. "I see. The emotional spectrum is broad. It's not just about the positive moments, but also about how you handle the challenges together." "That's a big part of it," Marco said. "Handling adversity together can strengthen the bond. making the relationship more resilient. David watched Elira's reactions closely, ensuring she was comfortable with the experience. How does this compare to relationships in your culture? Elira paused, reflecting on the simulations. Our connections are more communal, less individualized. This depth of individual emotional exchange is foreign but intriguing. They continued discussing, exploring the nuances of human emotions and how these are expressed and experienced in close relationships. David and Marco shared personal stories, bringing real-life examples to their explanations. As the evening drew to a close, Elira expressed her gratitude. This has been an illuminating session. Your willingness to share personal experiences has given me a much clearer view of human relationships. David smiled, pleased with the progress. We're glad to help. Understanding these aspects can only help foster better relations between our peoples. Marco nodded in agreement. And it helps us, too, to see our own culture through someone else's eyes. It's a valuable perspective. As Elira left, David and Marco remained, discussing the outcomes of their sessions. They planned to compile their findings and experiences into a comprehensive report for the Cultural Exchange Program. This could be beneficial for many others, not just us, Marco commented, his voice thoughtful. David agreed, his mind already racing with ideas for further research and exchange. The more we understand each other, the better we can coexist. And who knows? Maybe one day these lessons will extend beyond just our two species. They ended the night looking out at the star-strewn sky, contemplating the future, hopeful for what their continued exchanges might yield in the quest for deeper interstellar understanding and peace. As David walked Elira to the docking bay where her ship was prepared for departure, the air was thick with a sense of completion and the bittersweet tang of farewell. Their time together, though primarily academic, had fostered a deep bond of friendship and mutual respect. I can't believe how quickly the time has passed, Elira remarked, her voice carrying a hint of melancholy. It feels as though we've just begun. Yet here we are. David nodded, his hands tucked into his pockets. It's strange, isn't it? But I think we've accomplished a lot. The understanding we've developed, it's more than I could have hoped for. Elira smiled softly. Yes, the insights I'm taking back will be invaluable for my people. The way humans handle emotions and intimacy, it's quite profound. They reached the docking bay, and Marco joined them carrying a small data pad. I've compiled our notes and some literature on human emotional psychology for you to take back, he said, handing the pad to Elira. Thank you, Marco, Elira said, accepting the pad. And thank you both for being so open and welcoming. This exchange has been one of the most enriching experiences of my career. David looked out at the ships coming and going. I hope we can continue this dialogue, maybe set up a regular exchange program? That would be excellent, Marco agreed. There's still so much to learn from each other. Elira nodded enthusiastically. I'll make sure to advocate for that. The potential for future collaborations is vast. As they stood there, a loudspeaker announced the final boarding call for Elira's flight. The moment of goodbye had arrived, quicker than any of them had expected. David stepped forward, offering Elira a hand. Safe travels, Elira. And remember, this isn't goodbye. It's until next time.